Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the world for our online program, An Exercise in Morning, Part 1. This event is part of a series of public and education programs in association with the exhibition In Absence, Presence. My name is Bill Nguyen, Director of Nguyen Art Foundation. Just a quick introduction for friends near and from afar. Nguyen Art Foundation is a non-profit private art organization based in Saigon, South Vietnam. Established in 2018 by Nguyen, Nguyen Art Foundation serves the artistic community of Vietnam as a branching support structure and facilitator of artistic and intellectual exchange through our collection, our exhibitions, public programs such as this, and other development projects. For other information about Nguyen Art Foundation, please visit our website, nguyenartfoundation.com. I'm honored to introduce our esteemed guest speaker, Guy Kuls, a dance dramaturg, author, and researcher whose work continues to inspire critical reflections on how art engages with human experiences. Guy's book, Performing Mourning, Laments in Contemporary Art, serves as an important touchstone for today's discussion. His exploration of mourning, particularly through performative practices, resonates deeply with the questions that we at Nguyen Art Foundation have been exploring in our exhibition In Absence, Presence. This event is part of our ongoing efforts to foster dialogue about the ways art can help us to confront and process some of life's difficult moments of loss and grief. So during the first 40 minutes of the event, we will screen a pre-recorded performance lecture by Guy to introduce his book, Performing Mourning. As we share the video, please avoid pressing the pause or fast forward buttons on your device. In the second part of the event, I will join Guy for a conversation to explore how artistic strategies of mourning and remembrance can help us to navigate grief, preserve memories, and perhaps find healing together. During our Q&A, if you have a question for us, please type it in the chat and we will read it aloud. Thank you. I am thrilled to have the opportunity to join Guy for this conversation later. But for now, please join me in warmly welcoming Guy, who will share with us a few words. So Guy, I am passing the mic on to you.
Thank you, Bill, for this kind introduction, and also thank you for inviting me to this event, and also very thankful for all the people who are participating in this, I think in 3 different continents, and already between Bill and me there's a time difference of 11 hours since it's morning here and evening at your place, which you might see with the light changing while we are doing this talk. I just want to say a little bit about the video that you're going to see. While I was writing the book Performing Mourning, which took about 7 years since like the very first draft and the final when it was published, the desire grew also to practice what I'm writing about, so to perform my own lament. And towards the end of the process of writing, which I finished writing the book during the pandemic at home, I had just 2 things. First, I was invited for a short residence by the Municipal Art Gallery of Nicosia in Cyprus. And I started to work on this lecture performance there. So they're also part of the support. And then it was a second residence planned at the Souche Museum in Switzerland, Museum Souche, during the pandemic to finish the book. But this residence was postponed because of the rules of the pandemic. I couldn't travel. And so the book was already finished, and then the residence took place later. And it was then that I kind of, in the second residence, finished this lecture performance that you're going to watch in a moment. And the lecture performance is about 40 minutes. And since it was created, it has been performed about 10 times in different places in the world, mainly in Europe and North America. And the version you're going to see is the version which was a live performance in Tanzquartier in Vienna in the autumn of 2002. So this is just to introduce you the context, and we'll talk about it more afterwards. And the lecture performance kind of gives a summary of the first 2 or 3 chapters of the book, which frames a bit the reasons why I wrote the book and the reference frame of it. So we can start, I think, the performance.
Of interiorized mourning, there are no signs. It is the accomplishment of an absolute interiorization. All wise societies, however, have prescribed and codified the exteriorization of mourning. The sickness of our society is that it denies mourning. This is a quote by Roland Barthes. From October 26, 1977, the day after his mother died, until September 15, 1979, only several months before his own death, Roland Barthes kept a diary of his mourning on 330 fact sheets he had cut himself from regular leaves of paper. Referencing Proust, Barthes prefers to talk of his grief, chagrin, instead of his mourning, deuil, which he describes as a permanent state that will never leave him, nor will it diminish over time. The only thing he can attempt is to transform it from a static to a fluid one. On July the 30th, 1970, my father, Francois Coles, died in a car accident, a fortnight before his 29th birthday and less than 3 weeks after my 6th. Was it because of the time spirit or because of the violence of his unexpected death? It was judged unhealthy that I would attend the funeral. I was not allowed to perform my mourning, and as a result I interiorized my grief and got stuck in it. In the Greek tradition of the moiroloi, Laments, one uses the expression "he went uncried," which is indicative of a bad death. In a similar way as Barthes describes in his diary, my grief continued to exist in a discontinuous way, and its anger and sadness could pop up at any moment, triggered by the most trivial incidents, like spilling a cup of water or watching a television series. Especially my own birthday was a very volatile moment, and often ended with me shouting and crying there wasn't any reason to celebrate and receive gifts. The only gifts I continued to cherish were the matchbox cars my father brought me regularly, and which I still have, as you can see. One other particular incident that left a strong mark was my great-grandfather's funeral when I was 11 years old. The funeral was held in his native village, where it was still the local custom to walk from the church to the graveyard behind the coffin. My father had been my great-grandfather's eldest grandson, and tradition had it that he would walk at the front of the procession. But since he was dead himself, I, as his oldest son, had to replace him. Walking behind my great-grandfather's coffin, I felt both the youth's responsibility but also a burning anger at the injustice of the order of events. All through my childhood, my outbursts were tolerated and ascribed to my oversensitive nature. But as I got older, they no longer seemed socially appropriate, and I started more and more to interiorize them. My mother's way to deal with her emotions was to never show them, nor talk about my father, whose black and white photograph kept a central place of honor in our living room. She also never remarried or had any other close male friends. As a result, I was full of questions about my father and their relationship. I didn't dare to ask her my questions, as I was afraid to upset her, and instead my imagination filled in the gaps. For instance, for a very long time I cherished the memory of waking up the night my father died, going into my parents' bedroom and finding my grandmother in bed next to my mother instead of him. Much later I found out that the night of the accident I was on holiday in the countryside with my grandparents. Maybe the event did happen at a later time, and I just displaced it. memory and imagination got intertwined and veiled by suppressed emotions.
Bang, bang. That awful sound. Seasons came and changed the time. When I grew up, I called him mine. He would always laugh and say, remember when we used to play bang, bang. Bang, bang. That awful sound. Now he's gone, I don't know why. And till this day sometimes I cry. He didn't even say goodbye, he didn't take the time to lie. That awful sound, bang, bang. That awful sound.
The interiorized grief, especially the anger, also fundamentally destabilized the energy balance of my body. For one thing, I had an overdose of energy and recuperated fast from being a restless sleeper who often woke up from terrible nightmares. Even if the fuel of this energy abundance was a negative one, it drove my professional career forwards at high speed. But the speed at which I moved forward also involved the risk of missing some turns in the road. In my late 20s, this suspended state of interiorized grief led to serious mental and health problems, which were directly triggered by growing periods of insomnia. As Robert Bogue Harrison states in The Dominion of the Dead, the socially shared language of lament is a way to perform the individual mourning and to allow the work of separation to take place. If it fails, and here I quote Harrison, instead of the dead dying in me, I die with the dead, either through excessive identification with the corpse or through an inability to articulate my grief, which leads to any number of discrete, yet no less dangerous pathologies. After another one of these crises, I went to traditional psychotherapy to deal with these issues, slowly becoming more conscious of them. I also started to gently address my mother and ask her some of the unanswered questions I had. For instance, about the exceptional bond she seemed to have with my dead father, who came from a very different social background than her. It were first steps in exteriorizing my grief, but rationalizing and objectifying are not enough. You actually have to relive somatically the unexpressed emotions. In the summer of 1999, at the age of 35, almost exactly on the same day that my father died 29 years before, I had an extremely emotional breakdown because of a new romantic relationship that had ended. I cried for hours in a row, and both my body and mind felt completely paralyzed by a deep state of depression, which I was only able to overcome when I realized that I was not only crying for the present, but also for the unlived past. Afterwards, I felt completely empty. The anger energy that had been my drive for many years had completely gone, and I needed the remaining part of the summer holiday to recover. Shortly afterwards, I also started my yoga practice, replacing the negative energy source with a more positive one. I was also able to share some of my mourning with my mother, and in the moment of doing this, I also felt a strong energetic shift happening in our relationship. In Precarious Lives, The Powers of Mourning and Violence, Judith Butler formulates the hypothesis that the process of mourning implies accepting that by the loss one undergoes, one will be changed, possibly forever. Perhaps mourning has to do with agreeing to undergo a transformation. Perhaps one should say submitting to a transformation, the full result of which one cannot know in advance. In 2000, the summer after I relived the mourning of my father's death, I was invited to participate in the first summer academy organized by the National Theatre of Greece and curated by Eleni Varopoulou. It took place in Monodendri, one of the Zagori villages north of Ioannina in Epirus, close to the Albanian border. Our workshop was called Rites of Separation, Death and Exile and Union, Marriage, as a source for a theatre practice. Using fragments of Greek tragedy and the choreographic, musical and theatrical knowledge of the guest artist, we wanted to research how elements of the local culture could be actualized into a contemporary performance practice. For the latter, our international group was joined by the local moiroloi singer Katarina Zaka. Before traveling to Greece, I had studied the musical oral tradition of the moiroloi, improvised songs of fate and mourning, starting from Lauren Danforth's anthropological study, The Death Rituals of Rural Greece. Reality, however, proved much stronger than anything I had come across in my readings. We worked in a majestic landscape, the wild nature of the Vikos Canyon. Katrina and the other moiroloi singers who joined the workshop turned out to be powerful old women, semi-professional performers who were able to change register within seconds, joking heartily about the sexual appetite of the young men in our company or lamenting and crying intensely, bringing the whole audience to tears. Eros and Thanatos, sisterly and somatically reunited in the same female bodies and voices. One of the techniques of the moiroloi singer consists in linking the actual mourning process with older, personally experienced similar ones. How the lamenter draws parallels between the present lamented death and her previous own losses, in order to position any individual death within a continuum of pain. The music and text are highly codified and use standard metaphorical language, for instance plants, a cypress for a deceased male, an orange or lemon tree for a woman, and birds, for instance a partridge for a young female, an eagle for a young male. But at the same time they leave ample room for improvisation. The moiroloi are by nature theatrical and dramatic in the way the singer addresses the absent person and temporarily lends him her voice to answer back. A widow talks to her husband, a mother to her married daughter, a corpse to its own tired body. Like the chorus in Greek tragedy, the moiroloi are usually performed as a dialogue between a soloist and a chorus. During the wake, the role of the soloist in pain is passed on to several women. The mourner sings with more than one voice and in more than one pitch at the same time. Through the sob, the singer fractures the musical tone, propels it into the space of the klama, the act of crying, in a polyphony of pain, while the chorus reinforces the emotions with stylized sobbing. I invite you now to listen to one of the original field recordings of Katerina. One of the main goals of the moiroloi is to perform mourning, and by doing so to create tears as material signs of liquefaction, of grief. Danford summarizes it as follows. With crying and singing, a knot leaves one's throat. One is lightened and one feels cool. When a woman visits the graveyard and cries, poorness, anxiety, and poison all leave her system. A woman performs the necessary rites of passage and cares for the graves of the dead in order to get everything out of her system. These visits to the graveyard are one of the few opportunities for the cathartic outburst of emotion available to a woman in mourning. In her contribution to Rethinking Tragedy, the feminist theologian Kathleen Sands explicitly links the tragic with the traumatic experienced in loss. Whereas traumas are black holes which manifest themselves as gaps or silence, tragedy as an aesthetic form creates a ritual space where the trauma, rather than being silently reenacted, is solemnly voiced and lamented. Through this voicing, which is mainly a process of re-embodiment, the seeming fatality of the experience of loss as experienced after the death of a loved one is transformed. That is, it acquires a form which can be acted upon. The physical exteriorization through crying or lamenting of the emotions of mourning is a necessary part of the rites of separation, both allowing to stay connected with the deceased for some time and eventually allowing a reintegration of the mourner into society. As Ronald Barth's opening quote indicates, our Western society, with some noteworthy exceptions, such as the Greek example, has suppressed those external rituals and as such interiorized mourning, with the inherent risk of serious psychological, physical and energetic blockages in the body. Art as a personal or collective ritual practice has often created a space to articulate, relive, and by doing so, eventually exteriorize and exercise the resulting negative energy or energy blockages. I endorse the belief that art has a potential cathartic quality by allowing both its creators and its audiences to go through a process of controlled homeopathic poisoning, as expressed in the ancient Greek word for medicine, tilitheriou. The personal experiences are framed into a larger collective tradition and as such can become a source for a creative practice. Based on my personal experiences and the research on the moiroloi, I started to understand that a lot of art practices, both ancient and contemporary, are forms of lament, in which the community is brought together to witness individuals perform their mourning and by doing so express and share their grief. This is the main topic of my book, Performing Mourning, Laments in Contemporary Art. As I was working on this book project, a desire grew in me to create my own lament for my dead father, which could also be a lament for any victim of a traffic accident. At the time, I was engaging with the practice of dream opening, which was developed by the American psychologist Katherine Chainberg in her School of Images and is based on an ancient Sephardic Kabbalah tradition. The practice teaches you to better remember your dreams in order to open them. That is, to look at their meaningful patterns and eventually become a conscious dreamer. While I was doing this work with one of Chainberg's students, which some of you might know because it's Mala Kline, the Slovenian choreographer, and I think she also came here to share this practice. So while I was working with Mala, I twice dreamt about the solo I wanted to create and was able to imagine its three-part structure. My Laments begins with me transforming into my younger self, the child I was before and after my father's accident. In the second part of the solo, this innocent child's play begins to affect the entire body of the adult me. It becomes a dance in which I express both anger and self-inflicted pain. Eventually, the energy quiets down again and transitions into the third part of the solo, during which I sing my self-composed lament. I've developed several written versions of it, but I also want to continue to improvise parts so that I can tune in to particularly meaningful moments and places. I present you today one possible version. Da do da da do da. You always brought me toy cars. Da do da da do da, and then you crashed yours. Da do da da do da. You're dead tied me. Please untie me. Please unknot me. He, oh he, I'm sorry my death scarred you. He, oh he, I'm sorry I haunted you. He, oh he, I'm sorry I kept you embraced. He, oh he, I untie you, my son. I unknot you so that you can play, play, play again.
It's not time to make a change. Just relax, take it easy. You're still young, that's your fault. There's so much you have to know. Find a girl, settle down. If you want, you can marry. Look at me, I am old, but I'm happy. I was once like you are now, and I know that it's not easy to be calm when you found something going on. But take your time, think a lot. Why, think of everything you've got, for you will still be here tomorrow, but your dreams may not. How can I try to explain? When I do, he turns away again. It's always been the same old story. From the moment I could talk, I was ordered to listen. Now there's a way, and I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go.
That was the first part. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy, so much for having allowed us to present this pre-recorded performance lecture to our local community. I might have seen this video for 5-6 times now, and every time I watch it, it's I'm still astonished by the rawness and the authenticity of your expression. So just to wrap up a little bit, we're now moving into the second part of the program where he and I will have a conversation, a casual conversation about Guy's practice, as well as I guess some of the reasons, some of the conceptual reasons or meeting points as to why Guy and I are in conversation. So please, if you guys have any question for either of us, feel free to use the chat function to type out the question, and we will read them aloud. So Guy, once again, thank you for sharing this performance lecture with us. How does it feel to having had some kind of distance with it? How does it feel for you now to rewatch or relive these kind of emotions?
I mean, I don't remember having seen the full recording myself. And of course I'm touched by it, but I'm also not so much attached to it. And I think this is something also that I realized in the process, that I mean it's been it's a 55-year journey, you know, because I just got 60. As I tell in the lecture, it was a very for a long time, until my mid-30s, it was a problematic trauma that I carried and that influenced my life for the bad, but also for the good. I mean, I would never have built the career I built without this energy drive I had, that was kind of fueled by some kind of interiorized anger. And then I started. It was kind of with the older I get, I also believe in these kind of important synchronicities of life or coincidences. So I discovered the Greek tradition almost at the same moment that or the year after I relived the original mourning, and then I was on another journey of about 20 years on and off, because you don't do this full time. I mean, you also have your professional life, you have your family life, so you revisit these things occasionally. There's actually in the studies of mourning, they've gone away from this linear model that there's these phases of mourning, and the model that most people now kind of accept is called the dual process model, where you move between, let's say, loss-oriented. This says you always move between two cycles. One is loss-oriented and one is what they call restoration-oriented. And the loss-oriented is where you revisit some of the elements of the original mourning and the loss. But on the restoration-oriented is all the moments that you just go on with your life, and you're not kind of, it's there maybe in the background, but you don't activate it somehow. And so that has been another, after these 20 years of kind of on and off researching this topic in the lament tradition, then there was another cycle of almost 7 years now of writing the book, creating the performance, and also performing it for different audiences in different contexts. And I think it's important that I now have this kind of, myself, I have a certain detachment to it, which is also what these professional lamenters in the end do, is that they're able to reactivate the emotions, but it also belongs to their past. It's not to the present. And that's why they can hold a space for other people who are actually going through the mourning in the present moment like that. I don't know whether that makes sense, but...
Yeah, totally. I mentioned the word distance in my question because I really do feel like it's a really conscious effort on your part to really construct this sense of or like this sense of power and agency in a way in this act of self-reflection. It is as if you're looking directly at your unsettled past rather than romanticizing it. Laments or grieving and loss is not to be nostalgic of past times, but to look at them straight in the face. And I really do think that there is a will that needs to, there is a rationality that needs to take place there in order for one, like you said, to move from a place of lamenting to a place of restoration. What I also really like about this performance lecture is the jumping between theoretical meandering, and philosophical kind of inspirations, and into these more spontaneous, almost performing acts where you activated personal stories, personal objects, music, and also poetry. And so there's this dance between, looking inwards, but also leaving the self to look to relook at the self, but from an outsider kind of perspective. And I think this moving of energies is just absolutely fantastic to watch.
Thank you. No, in the making of, there was a moment, for instance, that there was this desire or suggestion also, because of course, when you make a piece like that, the people you invite people into the process that you trust to give you feedback on. And there was at one point there was also the suggestion maybe to learn the text by heart, so that to integrate more the two parts. But then, after discussion and reflection, this shifting the role from the reading, which is again another, as you say, another way of looking at it, and even creating more distance, and then going into a more performative mode. There was a realization that the shifting between these two modes was also powerful, both for myself and for the audience. And there's another thing I want to say is that although the whole thing is now extremely scripted, and it is kind of it's a performance script that I reenact each time. But I'm not I was never trained as a professional performer. I'm a dramaturg, where normally I watched the other people practice in rehearsal. But having performed it as a performer, I also realized that each time I do it, it does. There's slightly different versions that trigger in myself or highlight different aspects of the script. And I do believe it's always in relationship with who's in the audience and what they kind of ask or need. So like, for instance, the example, I think the version you saw is a more, I feel like maybe the sadness is more present there. And I remember in the after, we also had an after talk there in Vienna. And then often with this type of performance, also people linger even after the event is over. And there's always a need often then for them to share with me their personal experience. And in this particular case, there was a younger woman in the audience who came to me and shared that actually she in my story she recognized her father's story, and it was felt like the first time in her life that she started to understand why he was the person he was. When I did it the last time here in Montreal last autumn, no, not autumn 23, the version that came out was much more the anger somehow. So it was a much more aggressive version. Again, because maybe that was what I needed at that moment, but also my need is also always in a relationship who's in the room with me. So if there's anyone in the audience, even if it's a virtual room now, I'm always also curious how people have received it and what they experienced themselves like that.
Yeah, once again, guys, and if whoever that's in the room, if you have anything to share, please do let us know. Guy, I think what you just share about having the opportunity to kind of be in conversation with viewers is so important, because I think what I get from your book is which is this beautiful research on how contemporary artistic practices, or what you call contemporary forms of lament, can create this shared moments, these kind of shared space where both personal grief and collective grief can coexist. And I think it is so important that whether through a performance, through an exhibition, through an educational kind of endeavor such as this, that we build community and we bring community together to kind of ruminate over this idea of loss and remembrance, and sometimes I think the act of rumination is in itself a kind of a effect, and it is in itself will hopefully kind of create some kind of changes, whether it is on the level of micro individual or macro governmental. So hopefully, once again, if you guys, anyone in the room, have anything to share with us, you're more than welcome to join the discussion. I do have a question about the way that you have kind of divided the chapters in the book. So for those who haven't had the chance to read Guy's Performing Mourning, the book is divided into 5 chapters. The first chapter is Laments to dialogue with those who are absent. The second is Laments as a collective form of witnessing. The third, Laments of exile and migration. The fourth, lamenting unlived lives. And the fifth, lamenting the future. So I have a question for you, Guy, regarding the division of these chapters, and also the kind of frameworks that you use when it comes to differentiating the different kind of artistic projects, and how to categorize them, how to make them fit within these kind of chapter headings.
I think the first 2 chapters that you described, they were very early on. They were clear, so that there is, I think, a difference between an individual mourning process like mine and collective mourning processes, especially when these collective mourning processes are related to experiences of war, of genocide, or state violence. And I feel like I'm mainly talking about my own experiences, or experiences of people that I had a personal relationship with, in the sense that I had worked with them, or I was able to dialogue with them, not just with their work, but also with themselves. So I'm maybe the first chapter is maybe more based on my own experience. Then the third chapter, this was an early discovery that these Greek laments were not only used to lament the dead, but were also, for instance, they're also part of a song cycle during marriages, because traditionally the bride would leave her family to go and live with her husband's family. So they were also, whenever somebody moved away, and also in case of there's a whole tradition of these Greek laments that are used to dialogue with the people who migrated and who were abroad. So that became also, that was early on, because it was part of the Greek tradition, and then I found examples also of contemporary practices of that. The two other ones were kind of the unlived life. I mean, lamenting an unborn child is a very specific experience, because you're lamenting not an actual, you're lamenting the potentiality of a life that has not been lived. So that was like a more, came later on. And then the last chapter, I think that was the eye opener. For me, writing is also a dialogical practice. So in the sense that while I was writing the book, I started to talk about it, give lectures about it, and also developed a workshop model where I accompanied people to write and perform their own lament. And this workshop was also one of the goals for myself, was to meet people who had already an interest in this subject, and to meet other people. And then I was doing this workshop in a couple of times, also in the university context, amongst others here in Canada, in Ottawa. And in this university context, when I was working with younger people, and they choose the topic they wanted to lament or perform their lament on. And this was really an eye-opener and a surprise that so many of the younger generation were not lamenting something from their past, but will start to lament their future. So yeah, again, writing is a dialogue. So you bring in your own knowledge, you bring in your own experiences, but then you also exchange with others, and that then brings new topics or redirects. And this process is going on in the way that now that the book is published, yourself, but also so many other people from all over the world kind of, it's the first book, it's my fifth book that I published, but it's the first book that on a regular basis people contact me saying, I've found your book, I read it, and then feel a need to share with me their own experiences or their own work, because most of these people are of course artists, and that then is enriching and also transforming my own thoughts. I mean, if I would rewrite a book today, there would be other topics, there would be other orientations. And so maybe this is also a moment for me to return the question. I'm curious, you can share a little bit more about the exhibition that you curated, and why in the Vietnamese context this is an important thing to do at this particular moment like that.
Thank you for that question. I kind of want to bank on what you had just said during your experience of exchange with the younger generation of artists. and practitioners who instead chose to lament the future. I always, and I think this is public knowledge, that pain and loss and trauma, these concepts, these lived experiences, are often something that pass through generations, and it's also passed through different species, I believe, whether it's human or non-human. As long as you're a living being, you sense this kind of energy, and I think that to mourn is to remember for me, and I think to mourn is also a form of kind of is a form of resistance against forgetting. And your question is about the context of the exhibition that I curated, in absence presence, but also the context of Vietnam, of which the exhibition is very much a part of. I started curating in absence presence because I have always admired the way that artists work with both their brains and their hands. I love exploring how artists engage in the process of thinking through their making, whether it is with sketching, or with sculpting, or with making video installation. Artists' relationship with materials, and the way that they allow materials to form, to reshape the conceptualization and the formation of their work. To be able to watch this process is a massive learning curve. And so one of the ideas behind the exhibition in absence presence is to kind of explore this relationship between the material world and the immaterial world. So the world of objects, of matters, of the living, and the world of the spiritual, the metaphysical, these kind of realms that exist beyond present life. That was the starting point of In Absence Presence. But as I prepared and worked through this process with the artist, thinking about space, thinking about the relationship between the different artworks, I also realized that there is a very clear conceptual threat that exists there, which is that collectively these four artists, Oanh Phi Phi Nguyen, Nguyễn Thúy Hằng, Linh San, and Lena Bui, some of whom are in the room with us tonight actually, they are all connected because in one way or another, they shed light on a part of their personal story of mourning, whether it is the mourning of the deceased, the mourning of someone who will eventually pass away, whether it is the mourning of a lost nation, or the mourning of this glooming climate change issue that is taking place all over the world. These artists share this kind of space of using pain, using loss, using grief in order to suggest something else, whether it is a different way of living, a different way of looking at the world, a different way of changing how you treat, how you perform, how you live with your own losses. There's that conceptual thread was very much there. So in the larger context of Vietnam, of course, there's only so much that I could share because of the time limit that we have, but also because of the space that we hold. But you might have been aware that contemporary Vietnam is still very much defined by what had happened 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago, maybe possibly 1,000 years ago. But 2025, next year, in a month's time, we will be celebrating the 50th year of the reunification of Vietnam as one. Some might call it the fall of Saigon, which happened in 1975 when the Vietnam War ended with the loss of the American side. Although the war ended, this conflict, this war caused widespread destruction, issues of displacement, and of course casualties on all sides. So the question of how do we move on without appreciating, honoring, paying attentive attention to what happened in the past is something that artists in Vietnam have always had to deal with and explore in their work. These past issues, I think, very much build the foundation, the base on which contemporary artistic practices from Vietnam emerge. And as you might have known, from the fall of Saigon, from 1975 onwards, millions of Vietnamese have fled the country due to various reasons, which have resulted in a huge Vietnamese diasporic communities living in the States, Australia, in Europe, and of course in Canada. So what we have is, different generations, different families separated. Some remaining in Vietnam, others have migrated elsewhere. And all of these will have and will continue to lead to enduring emotional and cultural divides. And I think the role of art and artists, for me, first and foremost, is to talk about these difficult conversations that are oftentimes not realized or discussed publicly, which kind of goes back to one of my points earlier about your book, but also about the different practices that you referenced. I think sometimes in particular contexts of oppression, the most that we as cultural practitioners and artists can do is to create these little short-lived moments where certain communities can come together and express themselves. So yeah, I don't know if that answer your question.
Absolutely. I mean, there are a couple of things where you were talking about the exhibition. I mean, you said that the four artists that you brought together, although they do address also a personal mourning process, they're able to transform it. And this for me, I mean, the quote of Butler that I also give in the lecture, I think of all the literature I've read and I'm referencing myself, I think it's the main thing that, and I do believe that it's the essence of our human destiny, is this process of transformation. And mourning forces you in the sense that there's no way to escape it. And art as well. I mean, that's for me the link between art and mourning, that as a dramaturg, I talk about the reason why we create is transformation, which means we're trying to find a form that transforms our lived experiences, so that we can share it with others. And then the form itself can also trigger in these others, hopefully, their transformation process. And this is also linked when you started talking to this importance of memory and remembering, because I mean, and it's also not from me, this other writers have written about that, and it's quite common now to think about remember is also to take the body apart and then put it back together. So each time we remember something, we also transform it, or there's a potential at least for transformation. And that's I also think why in the real lived experience, these ritual practices and these mourning practices also need time and are cyclic, because we need to rewrite the experience for ourselves and also for future generations like that. And in cases where the lived experiences are collective and extremely traumatic, like wars or genocides, it takes several generations to do so. But it doesn't mean that we cannot, each generation, we cannot make the effort to contribute to that process like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think that even though we might be living and working in vastly different contexts with, specific kind of cultural kind of differences, this idea of intergenerational loss is something that, like I said before, it is passed on. And although the degree of our losses might be different, I think we will recognize loss when we see it, and as human, we'll be able to empathize with this experience of loss. And his history always repeats itself. The story of Vietnam is nothing new. We see it in our contemporary time, right? We see it right now in other countries. We see it in Gaza. We also see it in recently with the election in America, for example. Therefore it is also extremely important for artists and cultural practitioners to continue to remember these experiences, so that we can create a kind of a reminder for future generations, I suppose.
Yeah. I hadn't planned this, but if you allow me, and maybe this is also a good moment to start wrapping up the thing. Again, in writing the process, in the process of writing the book, which took about 7 years, it was often interrupted by things happening in my life. At one point, I did have a scholarship from the Onassis Foundation in Athens to go there for a 6 months residency, and I intended to finish writing the book there. But then my youngest son was born a couple of months before, and I felt, I can't leave the family now for 6 months. To bring them all with me was also too complicated. And I was also feeling like I'm in a completely different mood. I'm too happy, and we're celebrating a new birth, so it's not the moment to dive in, to return to this topic of mourning again. This dual process of revisiting the mourning, but then also being present for what's happening in your life. But then postponing the book, also in this case, triggered this idea. Okay, but then I'm writing about laments, but lullabies have a similar function, in the sense that it's a musical form to support, in this case, a baby, young child, when it needs that kind of soothing support. So I added also this chapter on the lullaby. And if you allow me, I want to read a short paragraph out of it, because again, there's this idea, and then you go into in your reading and the literature. And I've been a big fan of Ocean Vuong, which I think is one of the contemporary authors I admire most, both as a poet and as a novelist. And so this is me referencing Ocean. Ocean Vuong's poetic autobiographical novel, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, is a letter to his mother in which he describes their shared experiences, hers of growing up in post-war Vietnam and his of growing up in the United States after they immigrated. It ends with a journey back to their roots in order to bury the ashes of his grandmother. While staying in a hotel in Saigon, he witnesses an improvised wake where the laments are a series of karaoke songs performed by drag queens. This is me quoting Ocean. The drag queens are for as long as the dead lie in the open, an uttered performance. Their presumed reliable fraudulence is what makes their presence to the mourners necessary, because grief at its worst is unreal, and it calls for a surreal response. The queens in this way are unicorns stamping in a graveyard. And he goes on to recall how music was the sound of a woman wailing, and how he already heard this when he was still inside the womb. It was a Vietnamese lullaby, how every lullaby began with wailing, as if pain could not exist to body any other way. I mean, life is a cycle, no? And death and birth are just two sides of the cycle, but also of the continuation of it like that.
What a beautiful way to wrap this up, Guy. I do agree with you. As long as there is injustice and oppression, the voice of the artist, the voice of art, the tool of art continues to speak. We keep on mourning in one way or another. As we had just said in the, sorry, go on.
I think you should still, before we wrap it up, you should maybe still announce the second part of these meetings in January.
Yeah. Yes, I will. So as we had just announced in the group chat, if you have anything to share or any question, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, like Guy said, it is, I'm going to spend the last 30 seconds to also announce the second part of this program, an exercise in mourning, which will take place mid-January 2025. So in a month's time. This will be a group discussion, a panel discussion between Guy Cools, myself, and three artists, Ileana Ota from Peru, Sarah Buta from Canada, and Lena Bui from Vietnam, who is also a participating artist in my exhibition In Absence Presence. For this panel discussion, we will together explore the power of grief and the power of mourning in social and political movements, whether it's an individual, personal movement or happening on a larger macro level. We will also look at artistic practices that express anxiety about ecological futures and mourn future losses. For example, issues of environmental degradation or climate change, issues that are very much a part of our daily life now. So I really hope to see all of you back again in this room in January. More information about the event will be posted on the Nguyen Art Foundation's website and our Facebook. So please do follow us on both Facebook and on Instagram. Guy, once again, thank you so much for having spent your super early morning with us in the room. All of the beloved guests, thank you so much from wherever you are, to have joined us today. I hope that you have found the talk inspiring. And yeah, I hope to see you very soon in a month's time. Thank you so
Bill.
much.
Thank you,
Goodbye,
Bill.
everyone.
Thank you for the audience.
Yeah. Bye.